She walks into the room and smiles. But it's not the kind of smile that blooms from the soulets, the one she learned to wear like armor, the one she uses to disarm suspicion, to seem agreeable, to survive being seen in the wrong way. Because she doesn't feel safe, she feels watched. And there's a difference. Safety is a sanctuary. Being watched is a spotlight. One is freedom, the other is performance. One is breath, the other is surveillance. And in a world that mistakes attention for care, we've forgotten how deep the wound of being watched runs. How many women have had to perfect the art of being palatable just to avoid being prey? How many have had to contort their instincts just to pass through a room unscathed? How many have had to mistake the absence of violence for the presence of safety? She doesn't trust your silence because it's not still. It's loaded. She doesn't relax in your attention because it doesn't hold her, it assesses her. She doesn't feel seen. She feels scanned because this world didn't teach men to witness. It taught them to consume, to see her not as someone with sovereign energy, but as a projection to be managed, desired, owned. So now every glance carries a question. Am I being valued or am I being sized up? Am I being honored or am I being categorized? Am I being felt or am I being filtered through his fantasy? You can feel it in the way she laughs, controlled, calculated, not too loud. You can feel it in the way she dresses, not too bold, not too dull, constantly calibrating. You can feel it in the way she hesitates before speaking, scripting, softening, diluting, because history taught her that unfiltered truth is dangerous. This is not sensitivity. This is survival intelligence, because safety for her has never been a given. It's been a negotiation. And most men don't realize how deep that negotiation goes. It's in her tone, her walk, her silence, her decision to speak less so he doesn't feel small, her need to validate his pain before she expresses her own. She's not weak. She's hyper-calibrated, not passive, just exhausted, not overreacting, just over-anticipating, because her nervous system was trained to read a man's mood faster than her own. And the worst part, she's been praised for it, praised for being easygoing, praised for being low maintenance, praised for being so emotionally intelligent. But none of those were virtues. They were adaptations, responses to being watched instead of witnessed. And that's the silent epidemic. Men thinking they're creating safety when all they've done is lower the threat enough to keep her quiet. Because safety is not the absence of violence, it's the presence of reverence. And reverence isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's not performative. It's in the way you listen with your whole body. It's in the way you take up space without displacing hers. It's in the way you meet her not as a riddle to be solved, not as a trophy to be won, but as a sovereign world to be witnessed. But to do that, you have to untangle yourself from the programming. The programming that taught you watching is respect. That desire is attention. That keeping her close is the same as making her feel free. It's not. She's been watched her whole life by strangers, by partners, by mentors, by men who smiled with soft eyes and hard expectations, men who called her radiant while slowly erasing her edges, men who asked her to open up just so they could label her, men who said they loved her power as long as it made them feel stronger. So no, she doesn't feel safe just because you're quiet, just because you're calm, just because you say you're different. She'll feel safe when your presence stops being a mirror for her performance and becomes a space where her soul can rest without editing itself. That's when her body finally exhales. That's when her truth emerges not manicured, not modified, but raw. That's when her love stops being a strategy and starts being a pulse. And if you've never felt that kind of love before, it's because you've never made someone feel that safe. So stop watching. Start witnessing. Stop managing. Start honoring. Stop analyzing her expression like data and start feeling her presence like prayer. Because her presence isn't a performance, it's a living transmission. And when you watch her, instead of witness her, you reduce her to a frame, a moment, a role, a contour, when she is a force. And a force is not meant to be understood, it's meant to be respected. You don't need to analyze the ocean. You stand at its edge and listen. You don't dissect the thunder. You let it move you. She is no different. But we've been conditioned to relate to women like puzzles to be solved, not portals to be felt. We've learned to measure their value by how well they fit our narrative, instead of asking how deeply we can expand to meet theirs. Because to truly witness her, you must be willing to be changed by her. Not just impressed, not just aroused, not just inspired, but changed. And most men are too afraid to change, too afraid to surrender their internal hierarchy, too afraid to sit in the presence of something they can't dominate, fix, or explain. So they watch from a distance that feels close, with eyes that seem soft, but intentions that are sharp. And she feels it. She always feels it, even when she doesn't say it, especially when she doesn't say it. Because her silence isn't agreement, it's assessment. She's scanning for who you are beneath the softness, for the truth under your tone, for whether your presence is a performance or a practice. Because she's met your type before. The emotionally intelligent man who can quote Rumi but disappears when she sets a boundary. The conscious man who praises the divine feminine until she says no. The safe man who listens well until she's no longer saying what he wants to hear. You can't fake reverence. You can't weaponize empathy without her noticing. You can't call yourself safe while secretly needing her to shrink. So the question is no longer, does she feel desired? It's, does she feel free? Does her nervous system settle in your presence? Or does it rehearse? Does she feel like she has room to breathe? Or just room to perform? Because love without freedom is not love, it's captivity with a prettier name. And freedom is not passive. It's active. It's what you create with your choices, with your consistency, with the way you leave space without withdrawal, with the way you offer structure without control, with the way you invite her expression without editing it. That's when she is softened, not out of compliance, but because she feels her guard is no longer necessary. And a woman without her guard isn't a woman who becomes smaller. She becomes cosmic. She becomes unfiltered, unapologetic, uncontainable. Not because she's being held by you, but because she's finally being met by you. And that meeting, that soul-level convergence, it doesn't happen when you watch her like a prize. It happens when you witness her like a presence, not something to conquer, not something to possess, but something to reverberate with. Because the woman who feels truly seen doesn't just love you. She remembers herself through you. Not because you gave her anything, but because you finally stopped taking her voice and reshaping it into compliance, taking her wildness and softening it for your comfort, taking her silence and filling it with your interpretations. She doesn't want to be interpreted. She wants to be felt. She wants to be met beyond the image, beyond the identity, beyond the label of queen or goddess or high-value woman. All of that is still language designed to frame her, to elevate her in a way that still keeps her within your grasp. She doesn't want to be on your pedestal. She wants to be in her power. And her power, it doesn't need your permission, but it asks for your presence. The kind of presence that doesn't recoil when she gets louder, messier, realer. The kind that doesn't confuse her emotion for chaos. the kind that doesn't project your discomfort onto her as critique. Because she's not being dramatic. She's being honest. She's not too intense. She's unfiltered. And if you're threatened by that, it's not because she's too much. It's because you've settled for too little inside yourself. Too little self-reflection. Too little shadow work. Too little capacity to hold the mirror she becomes when she stops performing. Because when she stops performing, you'll see who you truly are. Not the version she coddled. Not the man she made space for while suffocating her truth. But the man who must stand in the heat of her authenticity without shrinking from it. That's the invitation. Not to fix her. Not to calm her. Not to turn her fire into a candle. But to burn with her. Consciously. Consensually. Reverently. Because that kind of woman does not need protection from the world. She needs freedom within it. And the man who becomes her sanctuary is the man who stops trying to contain her. He doesn't just step back. He steps up. Not to lead her, but to lead himself so deeply that she knows her expansion won't threaten his foundation. That's when she knows she's safe. Not because you say it. Not because you promise it. But because your presence proves it. And in that presence, she no longer feels watched. She feels home. Because home isn't a place. It's a frequency. And when she feels it, she doesn't have to ask if she's safe. Her body knows. Her voice flows. Her energy expands. She doesn't become smaller to stay close to you. She becomes limitless. Because home is where she's not interrupted. Not dissected, not diluted for the sake of someone else's insecurity. It's where her fire doesn't scare you. It stirs you. It challenges the parts of you that still want to lead without listening, to hold without honoring, to admire without understanding. And if you can't stand the heat of her unfiltered essence, it's not because she's too much. It's because you haven't yet built a self strong enough to hold her truth. But if you do, if you choose to meet her with full presence instead of passive control, if you choose to feel her truth instead of file it into categories, if you choose to honor her boundaries without needing to be congratulated for it, then she will meet you in places you've never known love could exist. Not because she needs to, but because she wants to, because she feels something she rarely feels in this world, unwatched, unjudged, unowned, free to unfurl, free to rise, free to not perform one more second for a gaze that was never sacred to begin with. And that's a secret. She never needed your gaze. She needed your respect. She needed your consistency. She needed your truth more than your tenderness. She needed your integrity more than your intellect. Because she doesn't need another man who watches her. She needs a man who sees her and stays. Not to manage her, not to mold her, but to meet her again and again where she is unapologetically whole. No fixing, no framing, just freedom. Because when a woman is finally safe, she doesn't become quiet. She becomes sovereign. And that, more than anything, is what she was born to be. And sovereignty is not a pose. It's not the curated caption. Not the aesthetic strength that fits inside a man's comfort zone. It's the raw electricity of a woman who no longer needs to trade her wideness for belonging. A woman who does not perform her softness to avoid being punished. A woman who does not tone herself down to be chosen. A woman who does not translate her intuition into palatable language, just so he won't label her too much. Because she's done with being reduced. She's done with being watched like a screen, studied like a theory, absorbed like a projection. She doesn't want to be understood. She wants to be felt. She wants you to feel the ancient wisdom in her silences, the untamed grief in her anger, the reverence in her no, the temple in her body. And that is not something you earn by behaving well. It is something that opens when you stop trying to unlock it and start respecting the gate, respecting her timing, respecting her boundaries, respecting that the deepest parts of her are not accessible to the man who wants to watch her. They are reserved for the one who can witness her, and not flinch, not categorize, not pull away when the mirror she holds reflects back everything he hasn't met within himself. Because if her rage makes you defensive, you have not met your own. If her brilliance intimidates you, you are still outsourcing your worth. If her power feels threatening, you have not yet claimed yours. This is not her burden to carry. This is your threshold to cross. And when you dow her and you stop needing her to be manageable, you meet a kind of woman who doesn't need to be protected from the world. Because she is the world. She is the forest and the flame, the river and the roar. She is the prayer and the earthquake. And when she knows she's truly safe, she doesn't just trust you. She becomes something through you. She becomes untethered, unapologetic, uncontrolled, and more whole than any version of love you were taught to pursue. Not because you led her there, but because you stopped standing in her way, because you stopped watching, and you finally started seeing, and in that seeing, something ancient awakens. Not just in her, but in you. Because when a woman rises in her sovereignty, she doesn't eclipse the masculine. She summons it, not the performative masculinity the world rewards, not the one obsessed with dominance, hierarchy, or status, but the rooted, awake, unshakable presence of a man who no longer confuses control with power. A man who doesn't need to be the sun because he understands his role as the sky, vast enough to hold her storm, steady enough to honor her lightning, spacious enough to never clip her wings. That kind of man is rare not because men are incapable of it, but because few have been initiated into their depth. Most were trained to perform manhood, not embody it, to lead from ego, not essence, to speak from knowledge, not knowing. But when a man stops performing, when he meets himself beyond the script, he becomes a sanctuary. He becomes the kind of presence that does not ask her to be less, but becomes more so he can stand beside her fully, not to tame her, but to witness her blaze. And in that blaze, he finds his own fire again. Not the fire that burns to control, but the one that forges truth. That's what happens when a woman feels safe. Not watched, not managed, not admired from a distance, but received. She doesn't just open, she resurrects. And when she rises, everything around her either ascends or falls away. So if you are not ready to rise, step back, because the days of watching women from the sidelines of your own unclaimed power are over. This is not an era of performance. This is an era of embodiment. And she will not shrink for your comfort. She will not soften for your survival. She will not filter her light so your shadow feels safe. She is not your muse. She is not your mirror. She is not your project. She is a portal. And only those who enter with reverence will be transformed. Because she doesn't just want connection. She wants consecration. She wants to be met like a sacred text, not skimmed like a magazine. She wants to be felt like music, not analyzed like data. She wants your soul, not your strategy. And she can feel the difference. She can feel when your compliments are currency, when your attention is a transaction, when your support is just a disguise for staying close enough to benefit, but far enough not to be accountable. She knows, and she's done pretending she doesn't. She's done playing small just so you feel big. Done making herself soft so you don't feel sharp edges of your own unhealed wounds. Done being polite when your presence feels more like pressure. She's no longer impressed by men who know the language of healing, but avoid the labor of it. Men who say, I see you, but refuse to see themselves. Because she's not here to be worshipped. She's here to be walked with in the fire, in the dark, in the raw, unraveling truth that breaks the surface of every real connection. This is where love is forged now, not in flattery, but in facing your need to be right, facing the subtle power plays, facing the way you look at her no with awe but with appetite, facing the ego that confuses her no for a challenge instead of a boundary. This is the new rite of passage. And those who can't take it will keep watching from a distance, forever wondering why she never trusts them, forever asking why she pulls away, why she smiles with her mouth but never with her spirit. It's because she doesn't feel safe. She feels seen through. She feels interpreted. She feels on display. And a woman on display is not a woman at rest. She's a woman on guard. She's a woman performing safety so she doesn't have to survive your attention. But you who have stayed with me this far, you are not here to keep her on stage. You are here to dismantle the stage, to burn the scripts, to tear down the pedestal, to meet her where she already is, whole, holy, human, not your muse, not your mirror, not your reward for being better than other men, but a sovereign soul who will never again dim her light just to feel watched without being held. Because the age of the watchful man is ending. The era of the silent controller, the passive manipulator, the man who studies her like an archetype while refusing to evolve, is collapsing. She's not waiting anymore. Not for validation, not for permission, not for some emotionally literate man to arrive with just enough awareness to pacify her, but not enough depth to meet her. She's not asking you to be perfect. She's asking you to be present, to bring your whole self, not the curated self, not the digestible one, the real one, the scarred one, the unfinished one, because here's the paradox. The woman who no longer performs for your comfort will love you more deeply than anyone ever has, but only if you can stand in her fire without trying to tame it. Only if you can see her radiance without turning it into possession. Only if you can meet her soul without mistaking it for something to conquer. Because when she says, I don't feel safe, she's not being fragile. She's not being dramatic. She's being honest. She's handing you the keys to the truth. And how you respond determines whether you're a guardian of her truth or just another pair of eyes watching her become something you're too afraid to become yourself. So don't try to manage her. Don't try to ground her. Don't try to study her until she makes sense. Feel her. Sit with the weight of who she is. Not just when she's soft, not just when she's sensual, but when she's storming, when she's silent, when she's sacred and uncontainable and says, I don't need you, but I'm inviting you. That's the doorway, not into her body, into her universe. And only the man who has emptied himself of performance, who has chosen self-possession over image, can enter. She doesn't feel safe because you admire her. She feels safe when you join her, in truth, in humility, in reverence, not as a watcher, but as a witness, not as a guest, but as an equal, not as someone who handles her, but as someone who honors her, because in the end, she doesn't want to be watched. She wants to be free. So let her be free. Let her be wild, vast, unfiltered, not because it flatters your image to be near her light, but because you've earned the clarity to no longer fear it. She doesn't need to be softened. She doesn't need to be protected from herself. She needs to be met, not with performance, but with presence, not with promises, but with proof. She doesn't feel safe when she's watched. She feels safe when she's trusted, when her silence isn't misread, when her no is honored without needing a reason, when her truth is heard without being turned into a lesson. This is not about being her hero. This is about becoming the kind of man who no longer confuses her surrender with submission, her radiance with reward, her body with belonging. She was never yours to own, only to witness. So put down the gaze that weighs her down. Lay down the lens of ownership. Step out of the role of silent judge and scripted protector, and stand beside her, fully, clearly, unarmed, unentitled. Then, maybe, she will finally feel what she has longed for all along. Not your eyes, your honor.